Good morning. My name is Greg Dichek. I am the Tier 3 support engineer for Pharos support. I come to Pharos from a background of systems engineering, networking, database management, and security. And throughout my conversations with many of y'all, I have been working to simplify and improve user account management. We have, in some situation, a significant turnover in the number of users in the system on sometimes even a quarterly basis. And at the end of the day, we really want to make user management easier, not just for the administration side, but for the user side. It gives a better user experience. It helps everyone appreciate the product a little bit better by almost to a fault, not even realizing that there is a product in their way keeping them from their print job. It allows us to identify the user, figure out what their print jobs are. It allows us to report on that information, and it allows us to figure out how to charge back for that. At the end of the day, we're handling both the authentication piece for in this day and age of security, and we're also handling the chargeback portion. But it doesn't have to be difficult. It can be kept simple, both as simple as swiping a card, typing a PIN, username and password. It can be almost anything. We can get a card reader onto the system. And although we have a lot of this in the documentation, it really boils down to all the pieces are there, but working with everyone, we've come up with a lot of different collaborative ways to simplify that and put all those different pieces of the puzzle together to come up with unique solutions. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to share what we've done together with everyone else. And maybe you're sitting there, you've had the system for years, and the security folks have come to you and said, okay, we're taking away this type of access. Well, now that takes out your authentication system. How can we adapt? Times change when it comes to security, when it comes to billing. So hopefully we can keep things simple for the user as much as they walk up, brand new student, swipe a card. They don't know if they're in the system or not. It just works for them. But that didn't take a person behind the scenes managing by hand or forms. So when it comes down to it, we need first and foremost to figure out who they are. So a person walks up to the system. How can we identify them? Because we want to show them, for security purposes, in many cases, just their jobs. We're moving to an environment where the open queues are nice in, say, a public fashion where it might not be the easiest to identify them. But most cases, you'll want to lock down the release stations. That's the demand put on you in managing the system. So how can we identify them? And we could do this through, again, card swipe. It can be maybe a username, password, PIN, or maybe a guest account. And what dictates a guest account? And there's a lot of flexibility. It doesn't have to be a guest card. Once we have that, just because I say my name's Greg Dichek, what's there to trust? What's there to validate I am who I say I am? So a person has a card in their hand. They go ahead and swipe their card. Is it a MasterCard? Is it a university card? Is it an employee card? How can we prove that card is valid, is useful? How can we prove it's tied to a particular identity? So we can do this any number of ways. The most common are Active Directory LDAP systems, but that doesn't have to be the only solution. We can tie to a SIP2 LMS system. We can tie to maybe even a direct database query. Or maybe it's something built into the Pharos database that's maintained separately. There's a lot of different options there. But at the end of the day, we want to keep this simple. We can even do something where the billing system handles the authentication for us. But each one comes at a trade-off. There may not be a perfect solution, but the most common is a basic card authentication. This is available right out of the box. You walk up, swipe a card. If the card's in the Pharos database, it just works. The plus to this is in a manual environment where you may have a paper form process. and you have an administrator or a proctor or a cashier dedicated to this, they can control which cards are in the system. They're handling the validation for you. They know by handing out that card or putting that card into the system, they are the gatekeeper, and they are handling the validation on a very personal level. But the trade-off is it's very labor-intensive. You need that person doing that all day, every day, especially on the startup of maybe a new session. In a high turnover environment, this is difficult. In a low turnover environment, that could be a critical piece of security that an automated system can be defeated, but a human intelligence can really add a little bit as a trusted resource to that security. But we talk about maybe making it a little bit easier. Maybe you have a gatekeeper, but you want to keep some stuff simple so they're not overwhelmed. So instead of an army of gatekeepers, you now have maybe one or two. And we could do this out of the box through auto card registration. What we can do is, it's built into the product with a little bit of configuration work. You swipe your card, just like we did before. If they're in the system, great, they're let in. If they're not in the system, we can kick off, say, a query to the Active Directory system. They'll want to provide a username and password, and we'll validate that against Active Directory. If that username and password works, we'll say, okay, we have validated those credentials. You have the card. You've given us a valid username and password. We're good to go. We will put that in the Pharos database. That's fine. That does have some limitations in that if user information changes, there's limited amounts we can do with it as far as updating that card. If they get a replacement card, the process works fine. You go up, you swipe your card, it's not in the system, and you type username and password, and it basically gets reassigned. But what happens if security measures dictate you're not typing a username and password on these release stations? Security doesn't care that it's encrypted. The policy is username and password, specifically password, does not leave the Active Directory system. You can do maybe a different type of authentication on that, maybe a username and password in the Pharos system, or maybe just passwords off the table entirely. But again, it's also maybe a little bit manual. Users don't want to type username and password. Maybe the display is kind of small. The user experience is not as good as it could be. So how can we make administration a little bit better and the user experience a little bit better? This is one of my favorites. A lot of times people are asking for Active Directory integration. And long story short, it's been on the minds of development and support for a long time, as it has been on your minds. And in my background, I've come across a lot of integrations. The problem is, anytime I sit down with development and we have a chit-chat about this, it comes down to we can get about 90% of the way there in generalizing the solution. But there's always that last 10% that people need to personalize for their environment. So what we've kind of come up with is a series of starter functions we keep in-house. And when we sit down and have these conversations, we basically end up putting pieces together. So instead of taking 4 or 5 days to put these types of solutions together, it takes a day or two. And what happens in the custom card registration, there's a little bit of upfront time in creating this custom scripted process. But at the end of the day, you walk up as a new user. You don't know you're a new user. You swipe your card. You're let into the system. Now, what's happened on the back end for administration? We've taken that card, and a piece of that card number, or maybe even the whole card number, is in Active Directory. It's a field in LDAP, or it's on another system. We can go ahead and query, look up that card, and get their username. We can now look up, while we're there, we have just the username, but depending on the system, we can do a lot more. We can pull in first name, last name, makes the reports look a little nicer. We can pull in their email address, which is great for mobile print and print center. We can pull in their group, which is a big item. A lot of folks have different pricing and security models and billing around group. We can do that and interpret a lot of that information too. It also helps us with a little by-the-by about usernames changing and things like that. So we don't have to do it for first-time users. We can do a quick check while we're validating that card. We can go ahead and re-look up their account and see if someone's name's changed. Maybe there was a misspelling, they got married. The downside is it's a little bit more up front, but the upside's big. You are now getting a user experience where a new user and existing user are no different than they walk up, they swipe their card, and it just works. From an administration standpoint, as long as the Active Directory system or LDAP or the backend system's kept up to date, it works fine. There's no additional management. It's all done automatically for you. Downside? Well, the cards or part of the card has to be in that system. Maybe it's not there. But we have many different backends we can talk to. It doesn't have to be LDAP. It doesn't have to be Active Directory. It can be any number of different things. And that's where the beauty comes in, because it gives us that little bit more flexibility. Sure, it gives us a little bit more up front, and yes, it's a scripted solution. But we can do a lot more with the information, including setting a starting balance for them. So you're probably thinking to yourself, well, okay, well, what if we don't have cards? We're a billing account-based system, and we have usernames, but we've never had cards. Or, well, people don't have a card swipe hooked up to their print center. There's a username and password box. What can we do in that case? So we can almost do the reverse in a way. If you have the complete card number, or you're a billing account system where your billing account information is in some way, shape, or form in this Active Directory, LDAP, or external database system, and we can query by username, why not do that? You can take a person's username and password, or it doesn't even have to be a password. That's the best part about the solution. The LDAP auto card registration relies on that username and password, but in this case, we're a scripted solution at this point. We can now take maybe a PIN or any other type of identifying information as that password. And we can go ahead and look up the system, grab their account information, and again, auto-populate the system, keep it up to date. User experience is much cleaner. Again, administration, much simpler, and it's mostly getting it up and running in the first place. But the beauty of both these solutions comes down to you're not using the Active Directory credentials anymore for login. You meet that security requirement. And in this case, if we're talking a PIN or a passcode, that might be a piece of information that under the security folks is really used for the printing environment that's stored in the Active Directory, LDAP, or external database. So maybe scripting, not a viable option as far as talking to an external system. Maybe you don't have an external database that you're allowed to connect into or a lightweight directory service. But you can produce a CSV file. You have this external system or this external means that you have for your other systems that's worked beautifully for years. Can we adapt this for Pharos? One of the things we could do is the user load. In Pharos Administrator, you may be familiar with pulling in a CSV file, and it's a manual process. We can also automate this as well through the Windows Task Scheduler and a Windows batch script. And on top of that, we can run user load in different modes. There's different flags. We might be able to do a little bit of work with connecting straight to Active Directory. It has some limitations, but we could also, the CSV file option allows us to pull in whatever's in that CSV file, but on top of it, we can run it in different modes. We can run it synchronously, we can run it to remove users, and then we can run it to put users back in the system. But by running it multiple times, we can send different flags in to perform different operations. So maybe one brings in the new users, one cycle updates the existing users. Then the last cycle comes through and resets their balances. So it's a twist on the basic card authentication, where we're pre-populating, but it's a little happy medium where there's not as much scripting work. The Windows Task Scheduler is already built into the operating system. The user batch loader is already there, and it's a matter of a couple command lines in a Windows batch file scheduled to run on a cycle. And it allows us to handle a situation where there might not be an external system that we can actively query live. So, a lot of different pieces as I talked about. So what I put together is a little bit of a matrix that maybe you could sit there from your perspective, and some of these things sound good, and maybe all of them sound good. what hopefully we can see here is a breakdown of what features are you looking for, and watch the stars line up. I'll be around for the remainder of the conference. I've already talked with several folks. One-on-one is a great way to collaborate and bring this stuff together. Please feel free to come up and approach me. If you've seen anything up here you're interested, like some more details, if you're curious about what are the limitations, what are the additional changes maybe we can make to this flow to really fit with your environment, I'm happy to talk about it. Right now, any questions?
Just kind of a quick question. Before we kind of talked about like the product forecast, and it looked like, correct me if I'm wrong here, but in May they're looking at doing a cloud-based for user management. How would these imports and updating of users be affected by that change? How would we be able to update the user management piece?
I'm not familiar with how the cloud management users are done right now. I'm mostly familiar with the Blueprint and Uniprint authentication systems. I have had casual conversations with the cloud folks. Unlike the previous incarnations where you have a badge reader and you have a physical station, like a PC station and whatnot, since we're moving to more web-based solutions, things like CAS, SAML, Cosign are more commonly talked about because you're less interested in passing sensitive information, and everything should be, for the most part, encrypted. We do a great deal in the cloud to maintain a level of encryption. So there's a number of options on the table. As far as the actual ones they've implemented to date, I'd have to check with one of the guys, see where they are and what their roadmap. That'd be a good question I would bring up with Bill and Cal. They're pretty much the experts there. And in their absence, I can talk with Jesse Atwater, who is the sysops backend manager for the Beacon product.
Okay. Yeah, I was more asking specifically for the user batch load and being able to do that. If it's going to be cloud hosted, where would we have to put the either CSV or text file for that piece? So, thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Clearly, there's a lot of scripting options for the authentication process, and I note that in your slides that it seems to favor the identification by card. On our system, we use the username password authentication followed up by a card swipe to identify what account to charge to. Mm-hmm. If we were to reverse that around to where a person could just swipe their card, mm-hmm. Is it scriptable enough to be able to do something like, okay, the card is swiped, but we don't know who it belongs to, query for the username, password, authenticate that, and then associate with the card on the fly? Is it scriptable enough for things like that?
So you're referring to go up, swipe a card, prompt for a username and password, and then validate.
If it doesn't know a username and password for that card.
Yes, that's actually how the auto card registration works.
With all the scripting and stuff that you've shown today and stuff, is there limitations between a PC station and an IMFP as far as what abilities each have? Because we've ran into a couple of things on MFPs that you just can't do because the interface doesn't have it or is limited to responses and stuff like that.
Yes, there are differences between the PC station and the IMFP. Some solutions will work with it, others won't. A lot of it boils down to separation of the billing and the logon. So with a PC station, you can separate the logon portion from the billing portion, whereas an IMFP, the authentication process, is always logon event and immediately, without sending back to the user, the billing balance. And it actually has a little bit of an advantage in why it was done that way, in that if you have proven someone's account is valid and useful, but your billing solution, you want to restrict access if their account is below a certain amount. It allows us to immediately handle as all-in-one the concept of don't let them in if their balance is below a specific amount, or if their balance doesn't check out on the back end. So maybe in the Pharos system, the card is great and it meets the criteria for your logon, but passing that card to collect the balance, you find out that the card's been disabled at the Seaboard Blackboard or external gateway system. At that point, since the card's passed the logon event, we still haven't returned to the user, and it has failed the billing balance event. That issues a failure to the IMFP, and it closes it out.
All right. Speaking in Seaboard and the denial of user accounts whenever it fails, is there, for example, the Seaboard system we use, they have to do maintenance every once in a while, and it's down for an hour or more. Mm-hmm. And on the AMFPs, it actually just dies because it can't do a verification on the account or anything. Mm-hmm. I mean, is there a way around, scripting-wise, to look it up, and if it fails, go on, type thing?
Yes. Yep. When we move into the relevant scripting, the way it works is when you have different events, we've put certain forks, if you will, in the product. And this gives us a big advantage from keeping customization and flexibility while with the ability to roll back to standard function. So it's more than just an override. It actually replaces the event. So when we put a script in place, it forks it from the behavior over here, which you'd normally follow, and we have full control. The downside of that is if there's any functionality that is normally occurs within the billing event, we now have to replicate that on the script. That's why we have a lot of starter scripts we provide with the product that try to replicate a lot of that functionality right off the bat, so you don't have to start from scratch. But the plus side is you're replacing that event. So if you don't like the way the billing of balance event works in a particular situation or based on a particular error code, now you have full control over that. And yes, it's a little bit more work to script around, but now you can handle it exactly the way you'd like to.
Okay. And